Hello and welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News. Tonight we'll be breaking down the true purpose behind Netanyahu's speech in Congress yesterday. Hint, Iran. I would just like to highlight 5 lies that Netanyahu made in his speech, as pointed out by my colleagues at Mint Press News. First one, the Israeli prime minister made up a news story about 2 babies killed in an attic on October 7th, which is impossible according to Israeli police records and public data collected from that day. Second one was, he said there was one of the lowest ratios of combatants to non-combatants in history. It's just like, okay, that's not even worth discussing since they dropped 2,000-pound bombs on tenement buildings. So they don't even know for sure who or what they're hitting, and a bunch of other reasons about like why that's absurd. 3, civilian deaths in Rafah are practically none. He made that assertion in the speech. If we collate all the geotagged video footage on social media, we know that's absurd. So more, and then fourth lie, I mean, there's like a dozen, but more about Hamas stealing aid. And, he can't really make that claim without acknowledging the settlers actually blocking aid. A 5th lie was that American protesters received funds from Iran. If so, I don't know. I'm still waiting from that paycheck from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. It hasn't cleared yet at all. So don't know about the funding. Also, there's literally zero evidence for any of this. So a lot of people have made connections between, this and the Fuhrer speaking to the Reich, but we're going to go ahead and skip over that imagery. So Israel is basically participating at the Olympics in Paris while Russia is banned, despite killing at least 80% fewer civilians in Ukraine than the Israeli state has killed in Gaza. Even the United States has prosecuted its own for war crimes, impunity for Israel, enforcement of international law for everybody else. So no clearer was this hypocrisy demonstrated than on Wednesday, July 24th, yesterday at time of recording, when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man with pending ICC arrest warrants for crimes against humanity, addressed Congress in order to shore up support for his political survival, because he needs U.S. backing in order to survive politically, because there are a lot of people in Israel who do not like him, and request more weapons for his war against Hamas. The main thrust of his speech was thematically organized by the supposed war between civilization, the West, and barbarism, Iran, mobilizing imperialistic language that would have made even Winston Churchill proud. So during his 60-minute speech, he received 58 standing ovations from Congress in a bipartisan spectacle of unquestioning adamantine support for Israel and its congressionally anointed king. This was all just simply state-sponsored propaganda. But Netanyahu's true intentions bled through the usual talking points in subtext. An eventual war, for instance, between the United States and Iran. He no doubt has elaborated in private meetings on his strategy for a wider war in the Middle East, and his plans, indeed his lifelong political fever dream, should be taken seriously by every American citizen. The war in Gaza has already destroyed or disrupted millions of lives around the globe, and there are many policymakers in Washington contemplating war with Iran. What we are seeing here is an escalation of a narrative push to manufacture the required bipartisan consent for another interventionist war in the Middle East. For decades, the United States has hopped from unnecessary localized conflict to unnecessary localized conflict. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Libya, Ukraine. But a confrontation with Iran would erupt across the region, potentially the globe, in a way that the U.S. military, economy, and citizenry is not equipped or prepared to deal with. Who will pay the price if this happens? Hundreds of thousands of innocents across the sea and tens of thousands of American service members, not the policymakers or the defense contractors that profit from these wars. So when Veterans for Peace, who I was out with at the protest today, it's kind of like a global organization of anti-war military veterans that do direct action. When they say our government is, quote, run by madmen arsonists who set fires around the globe, fires that enrich their corporate masters, this is what they mean. There is no reason to believe that Iran has greater territorial aspirations or designs on the United States' sovereignty, half a world away. right? So a war could also not be won and would be disastrous for America in myriad ways. There is an entire political bloc in Washington, though, who, knowing this, would plunge headlong into war anyways. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov's recent warning that any armed conflict with Iran risks drawing in other major global powers must be taken seriously. We're just threatening war right now, even though, again, we're not in a position to do so. Our armed forces are not ready to fight a major war 7,000 miles away from our territory, which is monstrously expensive for a country with like 35 trillion in debt. The American people, are they ready to take on that economic burden for the sake of what exactly? The nebulous and manufactured threat of foreign terrorism. They care now because of relentless fear mongering in the media. Just wait until the Strait of Hormuz is shut down, through which 1/5 of the world's oil passes through. Like, for real, you don't like gas and grocery prices now? Well, get ready, because the political and corporate classes don't actually have to worry about rising gas and food prices. They're not a paycheck to paycheck kind of situation like you have. You know, they can afford the war. And even though a great power conflict would devastate our economy, they're going to go, some of them actually want to go ahead with this. So we're already feeling the grip from Houthi actions in the Red Sea. So just imagine if the entire Gulf blew up. Oh, and never forget, too, that those that call for war always try to convince you that it will be short and decisive. And when it never is, well, too bad. We're already in too deep. Sunk cost fallacy, baby. We call it the MIMAC now for a reason. The military, industrial, media, and academic complex for a reason. Because those same think tanks like the Rand Corporation and pundits associated with like the Atlantic Council always double down on failure and push for more conflict, more tax money, more sacrifice from American soldiers and American families in order to plunder the poorest countries on earth. Because it's not about winning. It's about making money. So our only strategic imperative is, in the end, the security and preservation of the nation itself. With that in mind, is Israel actually our greatest strategic ally when it has suborned our legislature and wants a devastating war of annihilation against Iran? Because of manufactured lies, all typified by Netanyahu's speech. Now, let's get into the speech itself. The way he tries to manipulate and succeeds in manipulating the American legislature is very telling. So I'm going to bring up the first segment. And this was an hour-long speech. I've taken some choice clips, and I'm not going to address each point that he made during the speech because he made a lot, but I've taken some choice clips. I'm not going to address each point that he made during the speech because he made a lot, but what we are going to do is we're going to look at themes, because his true intention bleeds through in subtext. Real quick, Bobby, I just saw in the comments, Bobby Taylor, who brought the NYPD to DC? I'll try to make as much commentary in between this to make this viewable and watchable, but I do think it is important to actually see what he's doing, because whatever Netanyahu is going to do is what line AIPAC's going to follow, and it's what you're going to see parroted by our own elected officials. The beginning of the speech, he paints the theme. This is old imperialist language. You're about to see what I'm talking about.
I want to thank you for giving me the profound honor of addressing this great citadel of democracy for the fourth time. We meet today at a crossroads of history. Our world is in upheaval.
He's not wrong. We're at an inflection point, right? The status quo will never return to the same. The same systems that have been that have had hegemony for the past few decades are now kind of decaying in real time, quicker than anybody thought.
In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends.
The complicit Arab governments.
This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization.
Okay, yeah. So if you guys pull up, if you go onto Google and you pull up a poem by Kipling called "The White Man's Burden," you can see the same language used here. You know, you have children of the light and you have children of darkness. We are here to civilize the barbarians and teach them better because they don't know any better. So they need us to civilize them. This is how he paints it. He paints it as an old kind of like 19th century struggle between the Arab, the barbaric Arab hordes and the civilized Western man. And of course, this is baked into our institutions, right? This is baked into our education system. Like, this is really easy to appeal to legislatures, Western legislatures, using this language, because we thought that this kind of ideation didn't exist in the post-World War II era, when you had the dissolution of the British Raj, a bunch of countries having independence from British Imperium. But no, just as strong and vital today. He's actually using this language in 2024, talking to our Congress, and they're giving him standing ovations.
It's a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life.
Again, just not counting that perhaps up to 186,000 civilians have been killed in the relentless bombing campaign at the Gaza Strip.
For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together. Because when we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose.
Okay, but then again, there is nothing specific rooted in any of this speech. It's all like feel good. This is all political theater. When have we won when it comes to intervention in the Middle East? This is just self-congratulatory crap. It's meant for the peasants.
7th, 1941, and September 11th, 2001. October 7th is a day that will forever live in infamy.
So, of course, he tries to conflate the American experience with the start of World War II and the attack on 9/11 with the Israeli experience, further painting us as natural allies, though how we're allies is never, ever specified and will never, ever be specified by these politicians.
It was the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah. It began as a perfect day, not a cloud in the sky. Thousands of young Israelis were celebrating at an outdoor music festival.
Okay, so of course you'll never hear mentions of the occupation or Palestinian experience. He honestly gets into somewhat poetic language, and then he has this weird section later on where he describes in detail these two beautiful redheaded babies. There's a lot of bizarre things happening in this speech.
3,000 Hamas terrorists stormed into the dark dungeons of Gaza.
Yep.
Israel has already brought home 135 of these hostages, including 7 who were freed in daring rescue operations.
So about the rescue operations, first of all, the vast majority of hostages were returned through diplomatic negotiations. And, the 7 that were rescued, three were killed by IDF soldiers randomly shooting at any civilians. The hostages got away. This was early this year, and the IDF shot them. Also, he brings up October 7th. He brings up October 7th again, failing to recognize that he became prime minister again, specifically because of his hawkish defense stance, right? So he basically campaigned on keeping Israel secure, and he oversaw the worst intelligence and military failure in Israeli history. Of course, that will never be mentioned either. One
last time before I die. 2 months ago,
Okay, and then
authorized a breathtaking commando rescue operation. Our special forces, including a heroic officer named Arnon.
okay, so another technique that they use is going to be, of course, to humanize, use specific names for each of the hostages, and exploit individual deeds of valor and bravery. And, you know, of course, this is just how propaganda works. You take one specific example of something and you blow it out of all proportion. Again, this may be hard to listen to, but I thought it was kind of important just to go over how basic propaganda works, because none of this is sophisticated. None of Israel's propaganda is sophisticated, but the apparatus and the system about how it's disseminated is, because they have the Israel lobby. They have an entire infrastructure of like paying people, students to edit Wikipedia pages, to do revisionist history. Like, it is everywhere. And all the talking points are the same, and they're all typified by what Benjamin Netanyahu says. So he begins the speech essentially by framing this as a war between good, evil, civilization, barbarism. And then what do? Because his main purpose, his political dream, has always been to instigate a war between between America and Iran. Well, we're going to start talking about. He starts getting into this.
My friends, defeating our brutal enemies requires both courage and clarity.
Brutal enemies. Okay. You know, we've all seen the bombing campaign of Gaza.
Clarity begins by knowing the difference between good and evil. Yet incredibly, many anti-Israel protesters, many choose to stand with evil. They stand with Hamas. They stand with rapists and murderers. They stand with people who came into the kibbutzim.
Okay, so now this is the made-up story he uses, and it's actually really manipulative, because in a second you'll see how he's basically just making up a lie that's parallel to the story of Anne Frank that everybody in America knows, because we were taught that in school.
Into a home. The parents hid the children, the two babies, in the attic, in a secret attic. Mm-hmm. They murder the families, the parents. They find the secret latch to the hidden attic, and then they murder the babies. These protesters stand with them. They should be ashamed of themselves.
I mean, again, nothing sophisticated. This is just taking one atrocity story. And in fact, this is one that never happened, just like the overwhelming majority of war crimes that happened on October 7th never actually happened. So it's kind of amazing seeing all this happen in real time because of social media and everything. The amount of consent that is being manufactured by these lies that are basically unchallenged. I just often reflect on, like, what would the Iraq war have looked like if we had the same rapid transmission of information that was outside of the mainstream media. So this story is a complete lie. It's crazy.
Israel and the terrorist thugs of Hamas. We recently learned from the National Security Director, U.S. Director of National Intelligence, that Iran is funding and promoting anti-Israel protests in America. They want to disrupt America.
Oh, he's not wrong in that the protesters want to disrupt America, specifically the American government. The one main overriding theme of what was happening, what the protest was about, was specifically very simple, very conservative position. Stop arming Israel. It wasn't even about ceasefire. This was not a ceasefire protest. This wasn't anything. This wasn't a one-state solution. This wasn't an end the occupation, end apartheid protest. It was simply stop arming Israel. Because, as you know, the ICJ has just ruled in a case that's separate from the South African genocide case, that they've just ruled that Israel is an occupation and is guilty of the crime of apartheid. So any country that is aiding and abetting in the perpetuation of the occupation and the apartheid in Palestine is complicit in the crimes and must immediately stop. So that's kind of what this protest was based off of. It was stop arming Israel, because that's just the basic international law requirement of what's going on here. So by just protesting stop arming Israel, again, very conservative position. And so when he says that the protesters want to disrupt America, they only know violence, they only want to disturb the peace. It's like, no, we're not disturbing the peace, we're disturbing the war, because the entire premise of the protest was, again, for the last time, just stop arming Israel. That's it. But one of the reasons he came to Congress was to get more support for immediately funding Israel, because this speech was about, because a couple months ago, they halted one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, and he lost his mind over that. So one of the main purposes for him coming here was not just to continue his political goal of getting America to bomb Iran on behalf of Israel, but in order to make personal connections to a large group of congressmen so that a funding package does not get withheld ever again or slowed down. So yeah, this is that one shipment getting stopped is one of the big reasons why he's actually here.
So these protesters burn American flags even on the 4th of July. And I wish to salute the fraternity brothers at the University of North Carolina who protected the American flag against these anti-Israel protesters.
I mean, this is straight up pandering. Maybe this isn't the best time to bring this up, but flag burning is protected under the First Amendment and is seen as free speech as long as it's not causing any property destruction. So the flag that was burned was actually not the one taken down by protesters in front of the Union Square. The flag that was burned, we think, based off everything we've seen and everyone I've talked to, two random white dudes showed up and burned an American flag. Not an Israeli flag. It's very suspect. But again, we're going to get into that later when we talk about protest infiltration.
Iran is funding the anti-Israel protests that are going on right now outside this building. Not that many, but they're there, and throughout the city.
Okay, I mean, there's like 20,000 people there, so he's just trying to dismiss it. There's massive disruptions. In fact, we know that the speech had to be pushed back and that congressmen couldn't even get to Capitol Hill because we had set up little pods or cells to block typical intersections. So I was with a bunch of vets from About Face. We started out by blocking one intersection on 4th and Independence Street. And the cops came up to us and were just like, hey, there's a motorcade coming through. Like, do you guys want to get arrested? And then we're just like, we're not moving. It's like, and then the cops saw all the combat fatigues. It's just like, dude, how many of you guys want to get arrested? How many of you don't want to get arrested? And instead of doing that, they just rerouted the motorcades. We don't know if we delayed Netanyahu specifically or a bunch of congressmen, but there were disruptions. We achieved that objective, and then we moved back to the main protest. That was the march later on.
Well, I have a message for these protesters.
Okay, what's the message?
The tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes,
pink washing,
and murder women for not covering their hair.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you just murder Palestinian women for, that are in hijabs too? So I've seen how many sniper videos of just unarmed women in hijabs just getting shot in Gaza and West Bank for no reason. So let's talk about human rights violations.
Appraising, promoting, and funding you have officially become Iran's useful idiots.
Again, still waiting for that paycheck to clear. So again, yeah, I know I'm seeing people in the comments being like, I can't listen to this. Well, I can appreciate that. But then again, context does matter. And I don't know. I think it's important for posterity. Then again, I am used to from I don't know. I had an Intel informal intel background in the military, so I had to watch like all the beheading videos and stuff, and like all the ISIS like proclamations and stuff like that. And I guess I just kind of got used to watching opposition stuff. It sucks, but I mean, I do think it's a skill that people should try to develop, man. How many babies has he killed? We don't have numbers anymore because the Gaza Health Ministry no longer is able to identify or keep track of anything. So the casualty figure is like cut off at 40,000 because they have massive logistical problems in identifying bodies and who's killed. And that's just a fraction of the people who's killed. And the Gaza Health Ministry, which is very well trusted and is cited by the White House and 10 Downing Street in England, despite the media narrative, they're no longer able to give accurate figures. So they've kind of stopped giving figures.
Fast-tracking U.S. military aid can dramatically expedite an end to the war in Gaza and help prevent a broader war in the Middle East. In World War II,
again, always coming back to World War II. This is so any apologist argument that you ever encounter will cite World War II because it's something that we have collectively told ourselves was like America's shining moment. We were fighting fascism. And, we actually use the fight against fascism to justify becoming more and more fascist. Like, oh, you don't bomb refugee camps? Well, look at all the refugee camps the Canadians bombed, around Dresden. And it's like, okay, you're citing the most violent military act, the most violent war in human history, after which all of these institutions like the Geneva Convention, the ICC, the ICJ were created so that doesn't happen again. That's the great irony that's happening here. They're using World War II to justify a warfare that was so brutal that we had to create all these international institutions with the hope that it would never happen again. I mean, obviously controlling and projecting Western domination and anti-Soviet domination was also a big part of that, but you can't ignore the founding of that.
As Britain fought on the front lines of civilization,
again, civilization, got to bring up civilization when we're fighting barbarians.
Winston Churchill appealed to Americans with these famous words: "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job."
Mm-hmm. Of course, we know what job he's actually trying to finish.
End its rule in Gaza and bring all our hostages home.
He then gives a undetailed plan for the day after Gaza. You will never hear anything concrete from any of our politicians or anything from Israeli MPs beyond bring the hostages home. Hamas can't rule after Gaza. There's some vague idea of an Arab coalition right now that will, take charge. But then he says specifically in this speech that they, quote, do not want to occupy Gaza, but security forces must be in Gaza. So even after a ceasefire, it's clear that he still intends to have military forces in Gaza, which is a red line for Hamas. So right now, based off what is said in this speech, ceasefire deal is like not going to be achieved anytime soon.
Vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could also like de-radicalize Israel as well. And finally, just to drive home the Iran point,
I'm confident that our two nations will vanquish the tyrants and terrorists who threaten us both. As Israel's Prime Minister, I promise you this: no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the road ahead, Israel will not relent, Israel will not bend. We will defend our land, we will defend our people, we will fight until we achieve victory. Victory over liberty, rather victory of...
See, that is why I have subjected y'all to this much Benjamin Netanyahu. That was the Freudian slip of this entire speech. So he said, we will not stop until we achieve victory over liberty. And then it was like, no, rather victory over those who don't like liberty. So yeah, LGBTQ chickens for liberty. So yeah.
Liberty over tyranny, victory of life over death, victory of good over evil. That's our solemn commitment.
And in the end, it's all about Iran, man. Another salient point is what do you actually do with this speech? It's not, there's nothing concrete or actionable in any of this. It was nothing we've seen before. It was atrocity propaganda. It was the weaponization of the weaponizing of the Holocaust, bring the hostages home, a nebulous day after plan for Gaza. Apparently I'm an Iranian agent, and that's it. That's really it.